Welcome to Perspectives in Mobile, the news podcast from the Mobile Ecosystem Forum. Join us discussing the world of telecommunications, technology, and mobile innovations. From Florence, Riccardo Amati.
Artificial intelligence is becoming a core part of military operations worldwide. Estimates suggest that global defense AI spending will exceed $12 billion annually by 2026, with mobile and edge computing technologies enabling AI capabilities to reach the front lines, from autonomous drones and robotic vehicles to real-time analytics on portable devices. AI is now integrated into command and control systems, predictive logistics, cyber defense, and battlefield situational awareness, covering thousands of deployed systems across many countries. This extends across tactical operations, strategic command, and offers both opportunities and significant responsibilities. Welcome to Perfect Perspectives, the podcast in which experts, opinion leaders, and industry leaders talk about what they think, see, and expect in the world of technology, telecommunications, and innovative mobile services. I am Riccardo Amati, and I'm joined today by Ryder Boyd, retired U.S. Army colonel, researcher at Stanford University, focusing on the integration of emerging technologies, especially AI, into warfare and national security in the U.S. Thank you for joining, Brad.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Riccardo. It's good to see you again, and I'm really pleased to be here.
In this conversation, we'll discuss how AI is being deployed through mobile and connected platforms, the operational and ethical considerations it raises, the safeguards and frameworks guiding its use, and how militaries and industry are working together to implement these technologies responsibly, hopefully. Brad, you have a long career spanning infantry leadership, more than 20 years, Pentagon-level AI strategy, and now research at Stanford. Why did you start studying these things, AI, in the military and defense domain?
Well, I mean, the Western militaries have a long history of using technology to offset numerical advantage in an adversary. So it's not that technology integration is new in the U.S. or in Western militaries in general, but over the last 20 years or so, really the last 10, as compute power and data science and machine learning technology has become more feasible, what we've seen is an ability to not just automate processes, where we use computers to do navigation and things like that, but where we see the ability to possibly start automating reason. And artificial intelligence starts to automate things that normally really couldn't be done by a machine, and that starts to give us the ability to do things a lot faster, to think faster than an adversary, and to react faster than an adversary. So really things start to get supercharged about 10 years ago. And I saw that in the military as it was coming on board, the potential of these systems. And so I wanted to get involved, and I did, towards the end of my career, start to get involved with shaping how we actually use artificial intelligence to get that sort of military operational advantage. And I should also give you a bit of a disclaimer as well. Not only am I retired military and an academic at Stanford, I'm also co-founder of a defense software company, and I sit on the board of Kratos Systems, which does a lot of unmanned systems. So my perspective also includes sort of that commercial aspect as well. Full disclosure there for you.
Well, that's very interesting. And of course, I mean, you have a dual experience, and that shapes your perspective, I think. I mean, as a former military and a scientist, now a researcher, you were talking about your company. Well, so promises and risks of autonomy in military systems, because, the first thing one could think is that a friend of a foe or a foe. I mean, what's your take?
Automation inherently means something is happening unsupervised. Some level of task is being done without human supervision. Now, that automation can be something as simple as copies being made in a copy machine, right? We're very confident though, because that's a deterministic system. So when we press copy, we know the copies are going to get made. It's going to be right every time, even if you say make it 1,000 of these copies. What's changing though is that the artificial intelligence is not a deterministic system. It's a probabilistic system, which means it's what we call the asymptote problem, that no matter how good your data is, no matter how good the model is, it will never be deterministic, meaning you'll never get to 100% certainty. You might get to 98, 99, but there will always be a slight opportunity for error. And that error can be compounded by the type of use case that you're doing. And the use case refers to what have you trained the system to do, and are you using it in accordance with its training data? So the real risk becomes, as you're using these systems, are you pushing the system to be more likely to commit an error because your use case is deviating from the training data? That's a very complex way of saying that if you use the system incorrectly, it's going to give you incorrect answers. But how do you know you're getting an incorrect answer? And that's the real hard bit there.
You need somebody with experience to guide the AI systems. Would that be a problem? I mean, sometimes I think, for example, in my job, right, we can build, you know, a radio bulletin. You can do it by yourself with AI, and we can do the same thing that you would have done with 4 people working with you as an editor, 5 years ago. Okay, the problem is I know what to ask because I have 35 years experience of being a journalist and doing these things. Who is going to train the people that were me, like 35 years ago when I was learning how, some news judgment, etc. I don't know if I explain myself properly, but I'm sure I'm sure you understood what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think one way to look at it is that we sort of look at this technology as a tool that can be used by anyone. And I'm not sure that that assumption is valid. So you can imagine, a simple tool like Microsoft Word. We don't really worry about who uses that because it's a simple tool and anyone can get on there and use a word processing tool. But when you start to look at tools that are probabilistic and start to simulate or try to automate reasoning, you have to start thinking about who actually is qualified to use that system and how do you give them training to use that system. Human beings have a lot of cognitive bias and a lot of cognitive shortcomings, whether it's, we can go through some of those. And so when you're using a system that does reasoning for you, it's very easy to let it take over a lot of things that you wouldn't necessarily trust it to do. And so the idea that an AI-enabled system is just like any other piece of software and anybody can use it is probably not valid. What we're probably looking at, you're talking about, well, you need someone experienced. It's like, well, you need more than just experience. You need to select and train people specifically for using an AI-enabled system. Now, what does that look like? We don't really know, but what we do know is that some people are more susceptible to particular types of cognitive bias than other people. And we also know that if we train people to look for their own cognitive bias, that sometimes they can spot when they are starting to become over-reliant on a system. So if we make some of those assumptions, we can start to assume that, hey, if we're going to employ, let's say, a generative AI system similar to a large language model, perhaps we need to select who's going to use it, and then we need to give them some specific training on how to use it. There's also probably some other safeguards that we can put in there. I'll stop there, but we can talk about that more as we go along.
Preparation, studying, this is probably paramount in this era. And, I was giving examples about radio bulletins, but, in the battlefield is much more serious. And I was reading the UN's 2025 military AI peace and security dialogues, and they were saying, I mean, I can't remember who, but they were talking about decision time compression, the risk that AI speeds up battlefield choices so much that miscalculation becomes more likely. It's more or less what we were talking about, isn't it, Brad? How real is that danger today, especially when you think even about the big competition, international competition, among the big powers, U.S., China, Russia?
Well, if anyone was to implement one of these systems into their decision cycle, it would be very real. I mean, certainly the machines are going to speed things up so that decisions could be made faster than a human mind can comprehend all of the risks associated. However, these systems are not being implemented in that way yet that I'm aware of. Because the risks are too great. Not so much for the speed and the escalation, but just, again, back to the probabilistic outcomes, is that oftentimes reality is much more complex than the training environment that the model was developed in. And so when you take the model from training to reality, it just doesn't perform well. So no one is implementing the system because it doesn't perform well. So we haven't seen any real examples of a nation using the system to make decisions where escalation gets out of control. But we understand that the faster these decisions are occurring, the less likely it is for a human being to be able to understand what's going on. One other thing that becomes a challenge is that we're looking to use these systems to come up with ideas that a human being cannot conceive of in that span of time. So not only do we want it to make routine decisions quickly, we also want it to make brilliant decisions quickly, perhaps, beyond human comprehension given the time constraints. And what we're doing some research on that right now. When we look at, let me give you an anecdote. Back in 2016, AlphaGo, a model created by Google, was playing Lee Sedol during a Go game, which is a East Asian game. If your listeners are familiar with it, Lee Sedol was the champion Go player. When he was playing the computer, he was beaten by the computer because it did a strategy that no human would do or had ever conceived of. And this particular turning point was called Move 37. In the machine's 37th move, it made this decision and just blew Lee Sedol's mind. He didn't really understand. He got up, walked away from the table. The military, national security, is looking for that effect. Can we make a machine to give us a decision that is so brilliant that it will confuse the enemy and allow us to win? And we're calling that the Move 37 effect. Is there a way to create a machine that can give us the Move 37 effect? We don't know, but what we do know is there's a lot of risk associated with that, because the nation employing a machine that can do a Move 37 effect doesn't know what the machine's doing, nor does the adversary understand what the machine's doing. The machine may not even understand what the machine's doing. So this idea of trying to get automated brilliance without completely understanding what the outcome might be creates a lot of not just operational problems, but ethical problems.
Absolutely, very very interesting. And you were saying so. The U.S. is researching this. I mean, you mean the military? It's a military thing, that a military research that is homegrown.
Yeah, I think anybody who's looking to use machines to come up with courses of action, as we call it in the military, basically options, is looking for the machine to give options that, given the same amount of decision space, right? Let's say you have 1 minute to make a decision. A human might come up with fairly simple ideas that could be anticipated by the adversary. A machine might be able to come up with ideas inside of a minute that can't be anticipated by the adversary. Therefore, you have an advantage. But how do you know that that's a good idea or not? And that's the real question, is you don't know.
Yeah. Is that true that, I mean, you see even headlines in newspapers saying NATO should learn from Ukrainians about these things because Ukraine has become a testing ground. It has been for 4 years now almost for AI-enabled drones, autonomous systems. So is that true? I mean, they found some solutions, which is probably cheaper than sophisticated weapons that we have as NATO countries, and they're probably effective. So should we learn from the Ukrainians?
Yeah, what the Ukrainians are really teaching us right now is these systems, AI-enabled systems, are not ready. Okay, most of what is being used in Ukraine, let's take, the most famous example is drones. Those are all piloted by humans. Now, they might have some AI-enabled targeting, tracking assistance, very light um, AI integration. But primarily, those drones, whether they're surface vessels on the water or whether they're air vessels, those are piloted by human operators. Even the command and control systems that integrate some of these things, the AI that's being used is good, but it's not Skynet. It's not a computer brain that's making decisions. So what the Ukrainians are showing us is that if you want to fight tonight, there's not going to be a lot of automation that you're going to get. There's going to be a lot of small drones and these other things, but they're not going to be run by computers. What the West is trying to do is get to the next step by using Ukraine as a place to try and validate, well, what level of AI-enabled automation actually works? Right now, that level is very low, but can we push it? Can we develop something that's better? And right now, I'm not aware of anybody that's developed anything, whether it's automatic target recognition or any sort of reasoning that will work. They do good on object avoidance, so the drones don't crash into trees and things like that. Pattern recognition, there's some good applications there. But as far as like an autonomous system that goes out and hunts and strikes targets on its own, that doesn't exist.
Right, it's not a breakthrough what Ukrainians are doing. And I mean, about the industry, like I'm looking at some figures here. Um, Shield AI just raised $200 million, 2.7 billion valuation. One brief hit unicorn status at 1.1 billion for AI planning software. Palantir just landed a $250 million Army AI contract, and European defense tech startups attracted nearly 900 million, or more than that, in just the first half of 2025. Is the surge in funding a stabilizing force for this particular industry because it spreads capability, or does it fuel just the arms race dynamic, which is pretty worrying per se?
Well, I think that the private capital that's going into this demonstrates the new relationship between the private sector and the military in the West, whereas the military used to drive technological innovation from within at the labs in the United States. We have military labs and national labs that used to drive innovation. But because a lot of these technologies are dual use, especially artificial intelligence, the development is occurring much faster in the civilian sector. And so the military has turned into a gigantic customer to the civilian sector, and the capital markets are responding. So now it's believed that you can make money selling your dual use technology to the militaries in the West. And so, of course, the markets are going to respond to that. I think, of course, anytime you commercialize things, there's always going to be a little bit of hype on how good these things are because companies are trying to sell products. And that also drives, the market cap up and so forth, right?
Right. About, just in general, AI on the battlefield. It could reduce harm by, taking humans out of too dangerous roles. Have others worry it erodes accountability. Could all that, autonomous systems on the battlefields ever be aligned with humanitarian law and ethical standards? Is that something that can be? That's that is the same thing for all the AI. The regulation is a big issue here. But for the military industry, using AI is more. It's a more sophisticated kind of regulation. It regards international law, which is pretty, fuzzy sometimes. And do you think that it's possible to align international laws, humanitarian law, and autonomous weapons using AI? I don't know if I formulated the question
Yeah,
rightly.
no, I think I understand what you're saying, and yeah, I do think so. I think what you're looking at now. I'm not a lawyer, but I have these conversations a lot with the people that I do research with and so forth. There's two basic components of this. There's weapons law, and then there's targeting law. Weapons law is the weapon a legal weapon, and then targeting law is that legal weapon being used correctly. So I think that an autonomous weapon system can be fit inside the regimes that govern both weapons law and targeting law. The question becomes, how performant is it and how supervised is it? A lot of times when we think of autonomous weapons, we're like, well, it's unsupervised. And what we're really talking about is the timeline of supervision. And what I mean by that is, if you supervise something by constraining it, meaning I send it to a target area where I know there are no civilian targets to my knowledge, and I want it to destroy enemy tanks in that target area, and it goes in and does that, do I need to supervise it anymore while it's doing the striking of the targets, or have I bounded it in already sufficiently? And I think the general trend is that, well, as long as you've put the constraints on it that allow it to operate within your intent, you're probably okay. Because a lot of times what happens is people are thinking, well, it has to be supervised while it's doing the strike. But we don't even do that with human beings or precision-guided munitions or anything. That standard does not exist in legal circles for international humanitarian law, the laws of armed conflict, and so forth. So I think that the way we conceive of these weapons now, the general consensus, whether you're looking at the group of governmental experts or the UNCCW, is that these weapons can be legal weapons and they can be employed legally. They can also be employed illegally. And the question is what does that mean and where is that boundary? And I'll give you this example. The speed and the scale at which automation can do warfare will be larger than what humans can do. If you look at examples like the Israelis in Gaza, if you have a system that is, let's say, 90% accurate, that sounds great. 90% accurate shooting at 10 targets means that one target is maybe not the target you want to destroy, but 1 out of 10, that seems okay in a military context. But that's one. If you're shooting at 30,000 targets, now you're talking about thousands of targets that are not what you wanted to shoot. And then the scale of that starts to become an issue. Instead of one civilian dead in collateral damage, now you're talking 10,000, 15,000, 20,000. And even though the percentage hasn't changed, the scale of the damage is quite significant. And that's something that we haven't really learned how to address. And so I think going forward, we're going to have to start thinking about what does it really mean to be 90%, 80% performant. The two besides scale, well, let me give you one more example of scale. For example, if you're getting on an airplane, if 9 out of 10 times that airplane makes it to its destination, but 1 out of 10 times it doesn't, you'll never get on an airplane again. Right? That is not, 90% is not good enough for flying around in airplanes for human beings.
And we are merely talking about civilian lives.
Yeah, right. So when the military says 90% is good enough, it wouldn't be good enough for you to get on a commercial airliner if 1 out of 10 times it fell out of the sky, right? So what is good enough? And we don't have a good way to describe that number of what's good enough. But at the same time, collateral damage is not illegal. As long as you're not targeting civilians, you're still in. We accept that collateral damage in warfare is going to occur. So I think that, where we need to go forward is we need to talk about risk acceptance in context. And we need to talk about how we view the scale of warfare inside the context and what the risk we're willing to accept inside a given context. If you're doing counterinsurgency, your risk tolerance is going to be very low. But if you're fighting World War III over the skies of Taiwan, your risk tolerance is going to be very high. And the laws of conflict do allow for that. But I think that the way sort of the general public views that is not in line with what the law actually allows.
About mobile ecosystem, dual use, tech industry. I mean, much of the hardware infrastructure enable autonomy in war. AI chips, sensors, communication networks overlaps directly with the mobile ecosystem. Do you see the mobile and telecom industries as silent enablers of modern warfare, even if they don't produce, military weapons or military systems, but they just dual use technology?
Yeah, I mean, the network, the infrastructure. So when we talk about this in a military context, we talk about the transport layer, we talk about the data layer, the integration layer, and the application layer. But the transport layer is what enables everything. That is the infrastructure that allows information to move around. So if you're talking about telecommunications, they have a large part of that. A lot of these applications that you're trying to do, machine learning models and so forth, they're too big to run at the edge. So therefore it has to be cloud-based, right? And the data sets have to be cloud-based. To get access to that is going to rely to some extent on the telecommunications industry. Now, the farther you get out to the edge of warfare, it has to rely on the military transport layer. But at some point, there's going to be some amount of communication as you get back towards, the homeland, if you will, whatever your homeland is, whether that's Western Europe or the United States. The other thing is that the technology that mobile phones and so forth uses, it's already on the battlefield and has been. U.S. military uses small Samsung Android devices on their chest. They call it like the ATAC is what we used to use, Army Tactical Assault Kit. And that allows you to do your military applications, but it's essentially using a 5G cell network that's created. That's like that bubble is created in a military environment. What you're seeing in Ukraine, though, is, of course, all that electromagnetic radiation gets jammed and it becomes much more difficult. So they're starting to go back to fiber optic cables for drone management and so forth. So it's really going to be like not one solution. It's going to be many solutions that we have to shift from back and forth across the transport layer. And what does the telecommunication industry have to do with that? They're building part of that transport layer, plus they have expertise in that transport layer and how to move that data. So I think that there's going to have to be a lot of cooperation between the telecommunications industry and the military in order to fight effectively on a future modern battlefield.
Basically, the questions I asked you was preparing this other one, this next one. Are commercial mobile networks becoming legitimate military targets?
Absolutely. I think as soon as you start conflict, anything that's moving military data is absolutely a legitimate military target.
And that's very interesting. As someone who helped lead AI integration at the Department of Defense, the US, what advice would you give to civilian mobile and AI firms who may not see themselves as defense companies, but whose products are increasingly dual use?
I don't know if I have any advice. I understand the choices that they have to make. We've had some of these discussions in the United States as well. Um, when I talk about this, I usually say, look, there's three assumptions that I make when I'm trying to decide how to look at these sort of integration issues and whether you want to be involved in the defense community or not. The first one is every sane human being understands that war is bad and we shouldn't make war on each other. We all know it's bad. That's our first assumption. The second assumption is, unfortunately, it's not going anywhere. Human beings continue to make war on each other, as we see at Russia, Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, wherever. So we have to accept the fact that war is a part of our lives for the near future. And the third assumption is it's always better to win than to lose. And so those three assumptions put you it allows you to have moral standing while at the same time accepting that the world is a harsh place sometimes. So how do you want to participate in that? And I think what's happened in the US, and to some extent, in my opinion, what's happening in Western Europe, is people are realizing that, if we're going to have to make some concessions to maintain our way of life, and some of that is going to be allowing dual use technologies to be used in a military context. The idea is to make sure they're used in accordance with your moral and ethical makeup of your culture and background. And I think that the Western nations, the United States included, can do that effectively. I'm optimistic about it.
Sure. Couple of more questions. Let's say you had to brief a coalition of mobile and AI industry CEOs. What message you'd give them about the intersections, between their technologies and global security, not just military, but just, from like a geopolitical point of view?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say that any conflict in the future, any state-on-state conflict in the future is going to start on these networks. Okay. It's not going to start with missiles and bombs. It is going to start in the cyber domain and it's going to start on their networks. It is too late when the conflict starts to start thinking about hardening your networks and thinking about defense. You have to understand now that, as you implied, that these systems are moving military data and they're going to be considered legitimate military targets. And even if they aren't considered legitimate military targets, the adversary is going to operate on them and disrupt them and deny them. So you have to start now on making sure those networks are resilient, that they are redundant, they can withstand attack, and that they can provide essential services. And not all of those essential services are necessarily military. Some of them are making sure that people can get their healthcare appointments when they need to, or that they can order food or anything like that. And so I would say that, industry leaders that are working on that transport layer, that operate in that transport layer, need to wake up immediately and start thinking about that all day, every day, that is where the battle will start, is on your networks.
Last question, Brad. On a more personal note, decades in uniform, government service, what motivates you now in researching at Stanford? I mean, what do you hope the next generation of policymakers and technologists take away from your work? What do you want to teach apart from, the technical part of your teaching, but just in general, what do you want your pupils to take away from your work?
I want the world, to be safer, frankly. But I want people to understand that the world does not become more safe by inactivity, meaning just wishing for it to be safer. We have a phrase over here where we say, don't wish for it, work for it. And so to work for it, you have to first understand how things work and why adversaries are doing what they're doing, how they would maybe disrupt us and so forth. And also understand, what our role in the world is, being the United States for me, or the West in general. And I think with that increased understanding, people can have a very pragmatic view on how to make the world a safer place. And that's really my goal.
Brad Boyd, thank you, a researcher at Stanford University. Thank you for your insight on military AI and its transformative role in modern defense. And thank you to our listeners. That's it for MEF Podcast Perspectives for today. Stay tuned and good luck with your work.
Yeah, thank you very much. I enjoyed being here. It's always good to see you.
Thanks for listening to Perspectives in Mobile. Join us next as we explore telecoms, technology, and mobile innovations. Stay tuned, stay connected, and let's unlock the mobile potential together.